Should've known better, and I can't feel no remorse, and you don't feel nothing bad.
Hi everyone, welcome to another show of Chronicles of Hope. I'm your host, Emily Gray, and this is my co-host, Aaron Kucharski.
It's our Pennsylvania edition today.
Yeah.
I love it.
Is it our Pennsylvania edition? Is it our advocacy edition? What is it?
Our next level leadership edition.
Okay, I like it. So today we have Sterling Johnson's going to share with us a little bit of his story and some things that he's working on now. And we also have Brooke Feldman in the house, adding to the conversation. So first and foremost, Sterling, the biggest thing I wanted to talk to you about tonight, the most important, I think, that's going to come out of this whole interview that I've been waiting all day for is, were you happy with the outcome of the World Cup?
I was thrilled. I was thrilled with the
Were
World Cup.
you? Okay.
Everything worked out really well. There are a lot of Black diaspora on the French team, so I really support them.
Yes, you're right. I like it. We were kind of going back and forth a little
I
bit
knew this
about
was
it.
going to turn into soccer.
I'm sorry,
That's
I
all right.
couldn't help it. It's my first
Football.
soccer fan on the show.
Football.
All right, enough about soccer.
It might be the only one.
What?
It
You
might-
might
it
be
might-
the only one? That's cruel. That is so
I
cruel.
played soccer in high school. I still play soccer now. It's a beautiful game.
It
It's
is
a
the
game,
beautiful
Aaron.
game.
It's just nobody cares that France won. Nobody.
Well, here's my take on it. France was an incredible team this year. I knew they were going to win, but I really wanted Croatia. You know why? Because they're the underdogs, and they have so much heart. You should have seen, but it's just me always rooting for the underdog.
Yeah. I'm usually rooting for the team that's losing in the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, you just want them to come back,
Yes.
right?
That's right.
That's kind of an interesting, ironic,
Unintentional
unintentional
transition.
pun. So what we like to talk about here is like comeback stories, right? I don't know. Do we call it a comeback story? Do we call it
Redemption stories.
redemption? Do we call it recovery even? Because
It's interesting because Sterling, I've known you for a couple years now, and I actually can't say that I know too much about your actual. So, like, I know the issues that you advocate for, and you've been a person that's challenged my advocacy styles and my views on recovery advocacy movement, which is awesome, and I'm sure we'll get to that. But I actually, it's funny when you know somebody's just in recovery, and you're like, I actually don't know too much about your past, so I'm curious about it. Just how you're able to get into recovery, what that pathway looked like.
All right. Yeah. Let's start. Right. A little. What does the story look like? So, for me, I mean, I had a pretty common childhood. I was raised by a single mother, though. We moved around a lot. We lived in Texas for 10 years, moved to North Carolina, and then I moved up to Pennsylvania. What the main defining moment was when I was a senior in high school, and she had a stroke. My mother had a stroke. It was really intense. She was in a coma for 4 days, and I would just go to the hospital and visit her while I was, I would just go to the hospital and visit her. And I think that, for me, that is what really started, like, the trauma, the mental health issues. After that, I think maybe she did not get better. I stayed in my house by myself for a while, and then I went to a friend, not really a friend, just a person in the community that housed me. And then within that time, I had a breakdown where I went to a psychiatric ward for several days. Was feeling suicidal for the first time ever in my life. Actually, not the first time ever in my life, but it was just all the the loneliness and the hopelessness. I think I had depended on my mother for a long period of time, and I'm also disabled. I have visible disability. I have shorter arms than most people. I was born like that. My uncle has it as well, so that give context for my family, so it's not totally out of our norm. But it's still hard to grow up visibly disabled. It just so within that, I'm also queer. I'm also black, and we are in mostly majority white community. So it's just like there are a lot of things that said that I was going to be isolated or feel a different way. But in general, I did well in school, and I had a good experience with that. So I was able to go to college. So I'm in college. I'm alone. I had visited one college with my mother before she had a stroke. That was American University in DC. So I just went there, and from there that started, without having that much support, that was the first time I drank ever in my life. It was a Halloween, and it was just a part of my life from there. I don't know, by the grace of whatever, grace of God or my higher power or whatever that is, I was able to make it through college. I failed. I didn't show up to one final. That was the only thing. Yeah. So that really affected my GPA, and got a 0. But the rest of the classes seemed to be good. I had one time where I stole a book from the library. That was bad. But then, because I'm just a nerd, so I just...
Of all things you stole.
Yeah, I stole a book from... from the bookstore, because they were really expensive. Sorry, from the bookstore.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, from the bookstore, and they don't do that. They need their money. Well, they love money more than educating people. But I was definitely in this world where it was just, it's really hard for me to predict, for me to explain, because you're just like going forward, and not really thinking about anything else. Yeah. Right.
I can kind of relate to that, actually. I've had a similar experience, like kind of ending up at college because I was smart enough, but not really having a ton of support or really even knowing what to expect, having no idea what I was getting into. And like, unlike you, like I didn't finish. By my second semester, I wasn't showing up to finals, right? And I just like, it kind of shows how important that the support and encouragement. Would you say that you had that from your mom, or she wasn't well?
Oh, yeah. No,
okay.
She was she's been in a nursing home for, since that time. She's been in a nursing home for 6 years, and she's in Deptford, New Jersey. But I have aunts, and I would be able to go back to them during the summer. But, it's just having your home, like, taken away, and just your support system kind of crumble. Even though I have a dad who lives in Atlanta, it's just something that you'll never recover. It's something that's always kind of a hole inside of me. So, and my drinking is really based in like trying to escape that, escape the pain of that. I was able to go to grad school. I can't get a job, but I could do school for some reason. I could never.
Because you pay them.
Yeah. Yes, I could take out as many loans as possible. So they were like, "Yeah, sure, come."
Yeah, sure, we'll teach you stuff.
Yeah, we'll teach you whatever. The thing is, like within this, I was always like diverted in different ways. I definitely have some sort of privilege because I was definitely in troubled situations, whether it be drugs and then a police officer would like just say to me, it's like, "Oh no, you look fine. No, just don't do this again." Or they would ask me like where I worked, or like where I went to school, and then they would just kind of divert you. And it was just, I'm just really lucky that I never got pulled into anything. But yeah, it's just the usual drinking, and then do a little of, at least for me, it was always uppers. And I know when I got into grad school, I needed I just needed an Adderall prescription as much as possible. So that was my thing for a long period of time, getting through Adderall, using Adderall to get through school. And but it's so funny, throughout all these things, I was just always very known as like this very crazy person. I don't know, this always very queer, different person. It was very hard to keep friends. It was very hard to keep. I couldn't get it. Like I said, I couldn't like keep a job really, but I could always just like do school. So went to law school. My troubles are mainly based in like my being isolated and not being able to. By the time I went to law school, I got through that, but I didn't have any relations. I was in San Francisco, and I didn't have anywhere to live, and I couldn't pay this rent, so I had to beg my dad to give me money to fly back to Jersey. But I would just be on the street, and I don't know what I was doing at the time, but I was just going from like couch to couch, like friend to friend, like staying for a few days. By the time I was back in New Jersey, I just had nothing but GA, food stamps, and was just doing that for about 2 years, and until I was finally able to get a job in Philadelphia. Throughout that time, I guess in San Francisco, I was finally able to notice the pattern of me losing friends, getting into trouble at school, yelling at my roommate, having like promiscuous sex kind of times and things of that sort, like very late nights. And I'm kind of a hypochondriac, so I do know that things can be wrong. So I would go to meetings, recovery support meetings, and then I would not go. And then I went to hundreds of them during this time. This is what I tell people. I'm like they're 1,200 days. Maybe I went to one every like week or something. But like I just would stop in to them. But like while I was drinking and doing other drugs, just like as like part of my regular, just like I need to get through school time.
So how did you get introduced to like the support groups and stuff? Was there ever a situation where someone told you should maybe get help, or?
Thankfully, I started working for this nonprofit called the AIDS Housing Alliance, and a lot of the people in there were in recovery, and that's where I was introduced to it. And there was this one guy who I was just kind of attracted to, really, but he was just like, "No, you should go with me to this meeting," and he was like, "Oh yeah, maybe you would be into it." And so I went there, and I didn't really get that. Like
You went there for him.
Yeah, he was in the CMA. He was in the Crystal CMA, and I was just like, yeah, why are you going to these meetings? He's like, no, but you should go. You should go to these. Maybe you will like find something here. It's very funny, and I think about it, and I thank him for taking me there, because it's really the first time that I knew about that it existed. It's so strange how I don't come from a family of people in recovery. I didn't know anything about support groups or mental health or anything. I just thought people went to therapy, and then therapy fixed them. Ever since my mom had a stroke, I had been going through therapy that whole time, and the one-on-one therapy I didn't understand what therapy was. In fact, I just thought it was a place for me to like dump all my problems onto this person, and then I could remain the same. Like there's nothing about me needed to change though, until I got into like support groups, not just recovery support, but other support groups. Yeah. Like I started recognizing that there's a bunch of self-study and self-love that needs to be done for me to grow and be the person that I want to be, and I actually have to do that work.
So I have a question. Before you got into recovery, you were studying law, and you went to law school. Now, did you know that you were going to get into advocacy? Or was there like a different plan for your life when going to law school than what you're doing now?
No, I've always had grand thoughts. So my first thought when I went to American University was Arab-Israeli crisis. I will solve this. So I went to there, and that's what I figured I would be doing, right? So that didn't work out, and then I did a geography degree because I love geography. It's just a personal love of mine, and I thought that maybe I would be in the federal government or something. I couldn't really find a job there, and then I was like, you know what? I want to be a millionaire. So
It's all for the money.
I want to have
dollar bills.
I watch a lot of movies. I really love movies like Boiler Room and I don't know, just movies about rich guys getting money and being a stockbroker and doing
Whatever's going to get me the most money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just wanted. It's all about the rock and roll and the sex and the coke and all that stuff. So, yeah, that's.
He
what
went
I
to
just,
law school for the coke.
I imagine they would have them.
He went to his first meeting because he had a crush.
Right. He went to law
Went to law
school so
school.
he could do more coke.
Yeah.
Like it's just.
Yeah, and everything I did
Whatever.
was everything
Yeah.
I do is just kind of. That's kind of my life. I'm just a person that barely believes in like really planning things. I'm like, it'll work out. I mean, actually, there was this guy that I had a great resentment against and hated, but like secretly loved too. But he went to Yale, and when I heard, I like wanted to beat him really badly. So it's like all of, I don't know, my whole life is things like that though, where these little resentments and this like
That like fuel.
So you
your
take the
future.
route all the way around just to get right
Well,
here, you know, like.
But that's really, I mean, like listening to your story too. It's not just like you're not just somebody that says, I was isolating. It's like, you know exactly why you're isolating. You know, like the root of your traumas, right? Like, so it's you know reasons for why you're drinking. And it's like you've like discovered these, or like unearthed these resentments and like propelled yourself forward, or like there's some sort of competitive something in you that like drives your whole recovery that way because of these things that I like that you do both mental health advocacy and addiction advocacy, and it seems to me that people that do mental health advocacy can unroot the trauma sort of piece to it first, and we often separate that. And like I don't think a lot of the way that we treat addiction is specifically around figuring out that like what it was that made you use in the first place. Almost like eventually you might get to that if you do
Like,
step work. It might be like way in the future, but finding the cause and the trauma sort of piece to it in mental health advocacy seems like that's what you do first. And in addiction recovery,
Well, I think that like
it's like a slow discovery almost.
it's almost been kind of portrayed that addiction is its own isolated thing, right? And most people who work in the field or have any sort of expertise, they know that that's not really the case. There's usually some underlying trauma or untreated mental health condition. So like we all know that, right? But think about the person who's like binge drinking or finds themselves hooked on pills or something. The last thing they're thinking is this is related to the complex trauma I experienced.
one thing about that is that I also felt like so amazing in the trauma. I felt like this is my life. This is like these things happen to me, and I'm disabled, and I'm a freak, and I get to be this thing. You know, it was like I don't know. It was like the every single drug was like the hug that like said that like no, this is like you. This is you. All of these things are part of you, and this is part of your like culture and life. And it was really hard to it took years to figure out that like, oh yeah, those can be part of me, but I could also live a life that where I don't feel such suicidal thoughts or such homicidal thoughts on a daily basis.
Right. There's also a present and a future. Like we don't have to keep living there. You know, it's funny. I was having a conversation with someone who works in the mental health field the other day, and she was saying how now with this, we talk a lot about, how talking about the opioid epidemic kind of takes away from the addiction epidemic, right? And then she was taking it a step further, like talking about the addiction epidemic actually takes away from like mental health, right? Because it really is a piece, and that now like the mental health kind of advocacy and conversations that need to be having aren't heard because everybody's just talking about addiction all the time. I thought that was really interesting because that's not, and it wasn't until she said that to me, but it is. It's all big. It's all under the same umbrella, and we're like zoning in on these tiny little pieces, and not giving the whole big picture a look, I guess.
Yeah, it's like getting jammed up on the symptom versus really looking deeper at the underlying cause.
Right.
That's it.
All right. So I want to talk more about your recovery now. So I would imagine that, Sterling, I've met you once before. I know a little bit. I have like a really good snapshot of you. And I would imagine that the person you are today is not the same person who had one day clean.
Yeah, no. I mean, my recovery is really based in me getting involved with public health law research, which is a center at Temple.
Mm-hmm.
We put together laws on like naloxone access and prescription drug monitoring programs, prescribing guidelines, things of that sort.
Mm-hmm.
So it really, from there, I think I just sat down in my boss's office one day and I was just like, I want to be the drug policy guy. I want to know everything about drug policy.
Mm-hmm.
So can you make me the drug policy guy? And this was happening very close to when I have my sober date, which is about 4 years. July. What is this? It was July 14th, 2014.
Mm-hmm.
So 4 years and 2 days right now.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you. That was just. It was around that time where I was like, I'm here. Everything comes together for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I am just spending all day doing research on drug laws, on like harm reduction. And
is that encouraging or discouraging? Though? Like where the research sort of, because I mean, like the history of drug laws could get me kind of like I could bury myself into that sort of stuff. But then like figuring out how to change it is actually can be like an empowering sort of piece. And like I've always felt that advocacy or social justice issues has helped me maintain my recovery and moved it forward as well. Is that similar for you? Like, do you get discouraged by the fact that there's bad drug policy as much as encouraged that you can change it?
Oh, it's like revealing the truth, though. As you're revealing the truth to yourself, you got to the things you're reading. You're like, oh yeah, there's so many truths to drug laws, and there's so many ways to go against them, like from Good Samaritan laws, and seeing how those need to be all over the country, and then we would help people do evaluations to see like what are the results of prescription drug monitoring programs, to see if there's less opioids being prescribed and things of that sort. I think I've changed my views on those types of laws now, especially regarding supplies of prescription opioids. But like at the time, it was really enlightening. And I had a boss who had been involved with syringe exchanges in the early '90s and written about the law and its relation and how we undo a lot of unfair laws and try to make sure that everybody that does have a drug issue is given treatment and treated with kindness and with sufficiently funded harm reduction services in the city.
Yeah,
so.
can you talk about harm reduction for a little bit? Because I know that in Jersey, more and more people are getting inspired by some of the stuff that's happening in Philadelphia, where we talk about. For advocates for years, there are many pathways to recovery, We repeat it. But like whether that pathway actually exists in the community is like a whole other thing, right? And so, and harm reduction, we just had an event in Jersey down in Camden County College last week, and it was so new to people, even though, like, and there's a lot of misperceptions about what it is, what it's not. And so can you... So rather than us just saying harm reduction, like you talk about.
Well, and I
want
to preface
like
too that harm reduction was a kind of a dirty word for a little while, at least in my
I
experience
still feel
too.
like people think it is, and that's why I think a lot you kind of like have that. Like I feel like in Jersey we're a little bit behind just in terms of
Right.
our understanding of it. But
Yeah. So what's the philosophy, I guess?
Yeah, the philosophy behind harm reduction really is just lessening any of the harms that are to the person or to the community. Any policy that really speaks to that, and that means defining what the harm is. So sometimes that is the criminalization of drug use. Sometimes that is death. Death is the ultimate end to a person. So a harm reduction policy would be not having naloxone, being a policy that access to naloxone, and then sufficiently making sure that naloxone is available to people so they can reduce. You can reverse people that are overdosing. Harm reduction program would be syringe exchange, where a syringe exchange program would make sure that when we had HIV epidemics in early 90s, we have Hep C epidemics still, but we know that the reason that HIV is not as much of an issue among injection drug users all over the United States is because of syringe exchange programs.
Right.
That is the only reason. I think that we should definitely be clear about that. I mean, it used to be up to 80% of people would have HIV. That costs a lot to the system. That costs a lot in associated morbidities that come along with them. People live longer. We do not want people to suffer the things that come along with that. We know that drug use can be risky. It is risky. It's like any other risky activity that we engage in, but we would like for people to do it. We'd like to reduce the harm. We'd like to reduce the harm. I can't say that anything is safe really in the world, but we do choose to do it, and we would like people to protect themselves in the way that they can. Whether, and that goes to things like whether it be regulations around alcohol distribution. There's an alcohol regulated industry. That we know that people are going to have sex. It seems to be natural to people to want to have attraction to other human beings. So we love them to not spread STIs, sexually transmitted infections. So we give them condoms and such. These are, even in cars, we know that driving a car can be dangerous. It can kill people. It does kill people. It kills a lot of people. We know that. So we try to have seatbelts.
I love that analogy. I really do.
Speed limits. We say that you can have your child, and if you're a certain side, they need to be in a car seat. We know that texting is a dangerous thing while driving, so we try to limit that. We try to have rules around that. With all these things, it doesn't seem to make sense to have absolute prohibitions against them, because that seems to cause even more harm.
Right.
That causes things to go be below the surface, and that's where you get into illegal markets, illicit markets that are not regulated, that are usually regulated in a violent manner.
That's a really great point. It's funny, like I didn't make that connection until just now about the connection between harm reduction and how that helps alleviate those types of things, right? And the crime and violence that comes along with it.
Well, that sort of piece about reducing harm to entire communities.
Right.
Like that's the piece that I feel like doesn't get talked about too much. Like people think about harm reduction on an individual sort of level, but if you're looking at it in the sense of healthier communities, healthier individuals, healthier relationships between active drug users and social services, like whatever you kind of like, that's the piece that doesn't really get talked about, because when I hear the argument against harm reduction, it's always the piece about, well, what if you give out needles, you're enabling people to do more drugs, or if you have
it's always enabling is always like the rebuttal. Yeah.
Well, but it's the same people that were kind of like, Narcan, like didn't understand Narcan right away, right? And then you see that it actually helps saves people's lives, and to a point where hopefully and eventually the person that maybe overdoses or gets saved has that moment, and that window is very short, right? But as long as you can work to create those windows for people to have an aha moment or a spiritual moment or whatever sort of moment that person needs to get social services moment to get that person help. You can't. Somebody in the harm reduction event had said, "You're just." They called it harm. Like you're stalling. And like it was weird, and it was just kind of like, well, okay, maybe if that's what it is, like if you're stalling long enough so that the person doesn't die, and waiting for that person to have that right sort of moment, whether it's in a hospital or in an injection site, you know, there's just like, you know,
Because if they die, then there is no other opportunity,
yes.
right? And so it's a 0% chance. Or if they live, there might be even a 10% chance.
Yeah, and another point of this is that that's why you bring in the mental health part of it. And there's like a lot of like trust that has to be built for people to want to go, and there has to be a pool. And for me, the pool was I trusted this person. He was much older. He was a lawyer. He had been down. He had been homeless. He had known a lot. And I saw this individual, and I kind of wanted to be him, and that's what the pull that drew me to the AA meeting. And then I kept having different things that would pull me back to it, like no matter what. But that was because I happened to be gay, and I wanted to go to a gay meeting, and I needed all these all these men to like show me how to be a man and things of that sort. But that didn't happen. That didn't happen easily. That didn't happen like time after time. If a person is going to a syringe exchange and seeing the same people and being helped by the same individuals over time, that's the part of it that like even if we're enabling, it doesn't. We're like helping a person learn to trust and learn to be a human being again.
And people aren't using by themselves, right?
Yeah.
Like what the piece about you know, the fact that not a lot of people are dying by themselves, but they're not using by themselves necessarily, right? It's like if people can use drugs in a safe manner and supervised sort of manner, because I think Devin from Pennsylvania Harm Reduction Coalition was talking about how there's been no overdose deaths in the supervised injection sites. Yeah.
So that
0.
brings me, I'm sorry, I know Sterling, you wanted to say something, but also when, that's kind of what I wanted to touch on too, is that I know that you have been working really hard in Philadelphia to get, you know, what they're now calling, you know, an overdose prevention site, or could you tell us a little bit about?
Yeah, so we've been talking in the city since, I would say last year. I know a lot of people say January of this year, but I know that the Opioid Task Force has been in talks regarding, recommending opening an overdose prevention site in the city for more than a year. You know, since the beginning of probably the end of 2016. We know one of our amazing advocates that did actually pass away due to us not having an overdose prevention site. Paul Yabor went to every single meeting that the city would have around the city and talk about the need for an overdose prevention site because he knew his life depended on it. I'm sorry, and he is gone, but the whole point is that this is something that we've been talking about for a long time. In 2008, my old boss and other individuals laid out the legal cases that needed to be made. So whenever anybody asks a legal question, I just send them this 2008 paper because this is something we've been thinking about. And there are issues regarding getting it started in the city. There have been meetings.
What are some of the barriers? Because somebody asked me the other day, and I was like, I don't really know what the deal is. So
the barriers are mainly political. There are city council members that don't want it in their section of the city, which is understandable. Just because their constituents don't want it, but they're also not that educated on harm reduction as well. So, or about what the needs of the community are. And how an overdose prevention site could help. So, could
you explain too for someone who doesn't know what it is, what is an overdose prevention site?
So let's start at the beginning. Like, what is it? I just went to Montreal, which is a beautiful city. They have 3 overdose prevention sites and 1 mobile site. And it's inside of it. You walk in. There is I'm trying to paint a picture. It's a very clinical setting with little. I guess it's like a nursing station. It's like immediately like a nursing station. There's a computer and a nurse that would sit in front of
Like
a
a
desk, a
medical
large
facility.
desk.
Wow.
And
medical,
there's
yeah.
just a little place for, I would say, I think it's chapstick. There's some water. There's some alcohol pads. There's a waiting room to the left. There's 2 bathrooms that are just, like medical bathrooms, big and large, for people to use and have room in it. Then they would call your name, and you would go up and sign up that you would like to be a part of the safe injection site and use the safe injection room. From there, in fact, like right before the injection room is a little place for you to test your drugs. And because in Montreal, there's a lot of crack that's laced with fentanyl, they would like to test it to make sure, because fentanyl usually causes death for people, so that would tell them that. But from there, you would enter into a different room. You go into that room. There are booths. There's a metal desk. Probably, I guess, about 10 metal desks. There's like 6 metal desks on the back, 2 on the side, and 2 on the far side metal desks. There are like some plastic chairs. There's a big mirror that goes across the whole room. And then in the beginning of the room, there is a place for a nurse. There's a little red telephone that goes directly to an ambulance. And they have another telephone that goes directly to the police in case something happens or that any of those are needed. There's actually a lot of space because they would need to get a gurney into the room. They know if a person overdoses, they will call 911 to then have the ambulance come and to wake them up, but take them to the hospital. Because the person will definitely need follow-up after the overdose. So from there, a person can enter out of the room. It kind of goes in a enter one way, exit out a different way, and there's what they call a chill room where a person can relax, kind of figure out where they are, and from there they can also talk to a doctor, a nurse practitioner, and also a social worker, where they can get any issues that they have regarding housing, mental health, physical health, all those things that people need. So it's a place where you're engaging people on more than just an overdose prevention way, but their entire
so many
life.
opportunities to get
the
help
thing that strikes me is like it's like the less it is about the actual drugs. It's about everything that might be a barrier to finding that person support. Like I think sometimes when you think of harm reduction, it's like, oh, if I want to quit cigarettes, I'll go from 20 cigarettes to 10 cigarettes to 5 to 0. Like they're reducing the amount, but it's not really that. It's like this. I mean, there's a component of the person's actual drug use, right? But the piece about it's like everything else, right? Like we can't get every single person that needs treatment into treatment right now anyway. No. Right? Like we don't have the capacity to do it. And so the way that I kind of look at this, it's like in the meantime, how can we best help people who are actively using, who are stuck somewhere? Why are you stuck? How do we get you unstuck? What is, what's next? And that piece where you're talking about and we talked about it a couple times, like that sense of community, like if that sense of community is built within the social workers or the hospital workers or other drug users that are visiting this site, it's just kind of that's what eventually might lead to somebody's I'm ready. I'm ready.
Well, there's also like that part too that we talk about. I come from the counseling background, and we talk a lot about how, if someone isn't treated like a worthwhile human being,
right?
What's going to make them think that they're worthwhile? Right. So, we see that like in the treatment world, it's like if someone comes in to get help and they're treated like another number or with disrespect or they're left to, die under a bridge, then chances are they're not going to want to get well. So I think that that's another thing too, is like it gives people the opportunity to realize that, there are people around who care You know, if I wanted help, I could get it. I don't deserve to die because I'm a drug addict, obviously, because there's a place like this to keep me alive. And so it just kind of plants a seed too.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, that makes me think of how, it blew me away the first time I heard that the most powerful intervention isn't like an evidence-based practice or some kind of like clinical treatment, but it's the relationship between the clinician and the person who's receiving services. And so if we know that the relationship is really the most powerful element of treatment, why would it be any different pre-treatment? And so that relationship building is huge. And I often think of this as sort of the next evolution of the idea of multiple pathways to recovery that we've talked about a lot. And I think we've grown over the years with recognizing that no two people recover the exact same way. And this is sort of like multiple pathways to recovery. That for some people, they're ready to just practice total abstinence, that's it. And then that makes them a candidate for treatment. But we know that, treatment as it exists is really built for people ready to practice total abstinence. And that is not everybody's goal, nor is it, where everybody's at. And so this is sort of a pathway to recovery.
Yeah, I mean, that piece about there's those 6 words that a lot of us use of meeting people where they're at, right? Like meeting somebody exactly where they're at. And safety-wise, when you think about when people die of overdoses, a lot of the times it's from a long period of after a long period
Or a
of
short
abstinence.
period of abstinence.
Short periods of abstinence, right? And so it's not that, so instead of somebody having a short period of abstinence of 15 days in a treatment center or 5 days or whatever, and then just being released with no services whatsoever, which is actually makes it. I mean, I lost my best friend.
You're at a higher risk of dying.
You're at a higher risk. I had a best friend who used for years and had a very short, maybe it's like 15 to 20 days of abstinence, and he went back out, and he had died after that first back out. And a lot of people, whether it's short of stints in a period of abstinence in jail or period of abstinence in
like just detox,
coming out of treatment,
detox,
and then they go right back to communities where there's no resources or no community that we're talking about that's going to help them with their services. Where it's just like if you really want to meet somebody where they're at, and that person is doing a bag a day, and they want to do less eventually, or want to be abstinent eventually, but not today, then help that person be where they're at in that moment.
There's stages. Everyone goes through stages.
Yeah.
And the last stage before recovery is the action stage, right? And there's actually 4 or 5 prior to that. So if we're in this all abstinence world, right, and we're only meeting people in the action stage, then we lost a whole bunch of people who, okay, maybe they're not ready now, but the rate that they're going, at some point they will be. So there's these other stages that we can engage people and at least, like we said, make them feel worthwhile, let them build some sort of therapeutic relationship with a provider. And now, I was at a seminar not that long ago where, the main idea behind the whole seminar was using harm reduction as a place to engage people before the action stage of change. And I truly believe that that's going to save so many lives, because if you're not even, if you don't even have a conversation about your drug use until you're at that point, like chances, and the way things are going now with fentanyl and carfentanil, you're not, like, these kids aren't getting to that stage. You know what I mean? Like, they don't even have a chance. They're doing pill parties one day, and then 3 weeks later, they're shooting heroin, and, like, 2 weeks later, they're dead. Like, they haven't even entered the stages of change yet. So, yeah, it's really important that we start, meeting people, like you said, where they're at prior to all of that, and accepting, right? And I think that's a huge part of harm reduction, too, is accepting that not everybody's there yet,
Yeah, I do want to. I just think it's important. I don't know how much time we have, but there 1,200 people died of a drug overdose in Philadelphia. I keep looking at the numbers and trying to compare it to some other time or some other thing, but there or some other state. There just isn't. It just is a real emergency. We geographically, we're just at a very hot spot for new drugs that come into the United States. So Baltimore is the only city that has a higher rate than us, and that's that is apparent. That is an accident. You know, it's not an accident. That's just geography. So we're the next city on and we have a high rate of heroin that enters our market and a high rate of people that do it, and it doesn't help with opioids being prescribed to people, and then now prescribing guidelines ending people's prescriptions. So now they would go to fentanyl on the street. We need to talk about fentanyl as being the main enemy instead of opioids or even heroin. It's fentanyl. Fentanyl is the thing that's killing people. It's just really important. I was looking at some zip codes. I feel like there are like 4 zip codes in Philadelphia, particularly, that they're more than states. They're just like 20 blocks or maybe 30 blocks in Philadelphia are more dangerous than all the people that die in North Carolina or you know. It's really. It's really sad, and I think that there's just some facts on the ground here that make it really important for us to do something. And New Jersey too. Yeah. And New Jersey, we know that these things are not. These aren't accidents. Baltimore and Camden and Philadelphia are the places where there is extremely high amount of heroin and fentanyl.
So. If anybody's interested in kind of learning more or following the efforts with the overdose prevention sites, where can we get some more information?
Oh dear.
Should they just call you, Sterling?
Yeah, they should call me. You can follow on Twitter, at yes to SES. I will say this is a national effort, and we talk to and international. I mean, like I said, I just went to Montreal, New York. The people from the Open Society. You know, the people that Open Society now and projects in New York, they are people that started it in Vancouver, 15 years ago. They've been through all the legal battles, so they know that it's very hard. San Francisco and Seattle are 2 cities also thinking about it. There are many places in the United States that are thinking about it, but San Francisco, Seattle, Philadelphia, New York are the places with actual plans on the ground, actual. Mayor's offices that are saying that this is what we need. Actual people that are prepared to go to jail, people that are prepared to resist. They are all sanctuary cities, so they're cities that are that are prepared to do something that is against federal law. I do want to remind everybody that having the crack house statute that they recognize. So there's a crack house statute that was passed in 1986 that's meant to, it's really meant to target black and brown people and take their houses away, but it was also meant to stem the tide of the crack epidemic at the time. That was the response to it. It was actually quite harsh and was not met. Instead of meeting people with kindness, they were actually struggling. That law still is on the books. That law says that any place that is manufacturing or distributing a controlled substance can be taken by the government, and that's federal law. But you have to think about it. That includes every single marijuana dispensary, every single marijuana field, all around the country. That involves the laws are not black or white. There is an agreement among all the federal government and the states to not prosecute people. The representatives in Colorado have made an arrangement with the federal government to not take every single dime that they have in banks, Right. The law between state and city and federal is an agreement between as an exercise in federalism, really. So it's really important for us to think about that, and not just say like, well, this is illegal and this is not. That is not the way the world works. If the federal government wanted to and put money into, turned our military against the people of in its own country and just wanted to take all the marijuana fields and take every single penny that people were making from marijuana, they could do that right now. It's a Schedule I substance. Why don't they do that? It's because they know that it has some kind of medicinal value. They know that people should be able to enjoy it and that it is not harming people as much as some would say it is, And the same goes for the sort of harms that we do. No, we know that the drug that causes the most harm in our society and the most violence is alcohol. But we allow that to go to remain legal and for people to consume it safely in things that we call bars. That's a safe consumption space.
True.
So we understand that it's actually quite violent. Many bars can be violent spaces because they, with the whole intimate partner violence or the violence, gender-based violence that's done against women most of in our everyday society, and just based on our very violent culture that's obsessed with guns and violence. But I mean, that's the way that I see the world, right? Mm-hmm. So having an overdose prevention site that is meant to stop one of the worst things that I've ever experienced in my life, the amount of funerals and the amount of hurt and pain that that is expressed on an everyday basis in the city, and finding and opening something that should be not in just our city, but in Jersey and Baltimore and all the cities around here, places where people will not die, is really important. And we also need to do harm reduction outreach to every place in the city, because people are dying in their houses. We know that, right? So people, and that's just because of the shame and silence that goes along with using drugs, and we just want to take that apart. That's what this is about too. Overdose prevention sites are about building community and taking down the stigma and shame that people say that they say they're about ending stigma. But if you want to end stigma, you would probably want to open an overdose prevention site, because it would create a space where people could do it safely and without being criminalized and being thrown into jail and thrown into a endless cycle where they go into jail. Either you're on vacation, you're on probation, getting violations.
That's not vacation.
Yeah. Getting violations, being put into jail, back into jail. The harm of the criminal justice system on people that use drugs, this clearly puts them into a second-class citizenship that they never end. They're returning citizens for the rest of their lives. I don't know. There are just so many things here. I've gone on a kind of a rant. Sorry.
I could listen to your rants all day. There's so many topics, there's so much important stuff that we didn't get a chance to talk about. But I appreciate so much having you come and tell us all about your efforts and kind of your story and how you got into it. Any last words, Aaron, before we?
I'll just say you're hanging out to listen to Brooke's interview too, so feel free to.
So you can chime in on that. Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, that does it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
That does it for us today with Sterling Johnson, and keep an eye out for our YouTube video and follow us on social media, and get out there and advocate. Right.
That's it.
She'll lie and steal and cheat and beg you from her knees, make you think she means it this time. She'll tear a hole in you, the one you can't repair. But I still love her, I don't really care. When we were young, oh, we did enough. When it got cold, ooh, we bundled up. I can't be told, I can't be done. It's better to feel pain than nothing at all. The it up. Keep your love